not livable places. But after the tornado, not only was there the people who were displaced by the tornado itself by destroying or damaging their homes, but it severely impacted our economy. Rent prices shot up. So a lot of people who weren't impacted by the tornado directly were now being pushed out of their homes because they could no longer afford to live there. Also, we had some larger companies come in and give offers that small apartment complex owners couldn't refuse, bought them out of theirs, and then jacked up the rent on people who had lived in those apartments and homes for decades. So we had people who were displaced like by the tornado itself, and then people who were displaced by the impact on the economy. So yeah, we've definitely experienced that.
Yeah, and I think that's again a reason why Habitat really took a big part in sort of the recovery process. And so maybe, Macy, can you tell us a little bit about, how did this idea come to fruition, and where did it start from?
So we weren't the only community that was impacted by the tornadoes. There was a few other places, Dawson Springs, Ohio County, and a couple other areas. So actually our state office, Kentucky Habitat, reached out to 4 of us, one of them being Penny Rowell Habitat as well, and came up with a plan. Safe at Home is what it's called, basically in a response to this. Ultimately, the plan was to build 300 homes in 3 years, and we actually agreed to 30 of those homes in 3 years. So our Blitz build in last year was 10 of those homes. We're working on 10 of those homes this year as well, and then next year we'll do 10 also.
Oh, that's awesome. And you already mentioned this already, but obviously something like this takes a ton of community support. And so, we found this sort of online in terms of all the different sponsors you all had, but, anything, come to mind in terms of, how you're able to rally the community?
So, like I said, the community and people from far and wide showed up in droves, just wanting to do whatever they could to help. And that wasn't just individuals, but also corporations and things. The Home Depot Foundation was pivotal in this for us, both in immediate response to the tornado. They had boots on the ground morning after the tornado, handing out buckets and tarps and all kinds of things. But for our Blitz build specifically, they were a huge donor as far as monetarily, but also they sent groups of volunteers who were actually staff members from Indiana and Kentucky and locally as well. So they were a huge part of this. And then I have to also shout out Habitat Metro Louisville, because they sent their entire construction crew to Bowling Green for the week of our Blitz build. They paused construction on their site and sent their entire construction crew, and they were actually played a huge role, because with the staff size that we have, we did not have the people with the construction experience to lead as many volunteers as we were going to have in order to carry this out. So they were amazing, and then they also sponsored a whole house as well. So wow, they were awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, a lot of companies talk about corporate social responsibility and their values and supporting the community, but it's really awesome to see when companies actually follow through with that, with especially with the Home Depot Foundation. Right? And so that's great. Something to note, I suppose, for any other habitats, perhaps, in terms of places for support. And so we'll dive into the planning phase here. And so as we got, we sort of pulled some of the numbers for Habitat Bowling Green. Like Macy said, we've been working together since 2020, and so this is some of the pre-Build Blitz sort of numbers. And so typically, before, obviously there's a pandemic happening too, so there's a little bit of context. But before the Build Blitz, there was 13 active volunteers per month, 315 volunteer hours per month. that also, resulted in sort of 67 volunteering activities or, instances of volunteering. And so this is what we had, going into the Build Blitz, so to speak, right? And I think, what you're going to see going forward is that obviously the scale of, of the involvement of volunteers really, really increased. But before we dive into that, right, I also wanted to just highlight, what sort of the resources, Macy, you're, working with, right? And so I think you mentioned, this is the team that you had going into the Build Blitz. And so maybe tell me, a little bit more about, how did you leverage the team that you already had, and how many more folks did you end up needing for the Build Blitz itself?
Yeah, so our entire affiliate is from restore to construction and everything in between is 9 individuals. So everybody, it was all hands on deck that week. And really, when it comes to planning it, there was only a handful of us, not even 9, I'd say 3 or 4. But basically, we just had to divide up where we needed more people here and there and figure that out. And then we also have a group of amazing core volunteers on our build site who are a group of predominantly retired men who come out basically full time and have been for close to 20 years, if not more, helping build the houses. So they were also extremely important to this process. But that being said, these numbers are not it, when it came to planning it. We had a lot of help. Our board members were pretty involved. And then we also had a lot of volunteers who maybe they wanted to be involved, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable doing construction or couldn't do construction or whatever. They also were a huge help. So we actually had group of volunteers who came forward and they were just individuals from different groups when they found out that I was looking for people to be there as first aid in our first aid area, who were retired RNs and things like that. So they were on top of making sure everybody was drinking water, everybody looked okay, nobody was getting overheated. If anybody got a bruise or a bump or anything, they'd take care of that. So that was not staff members. A big part of our hospitality group, which is food and hydration, was volunteers. So the 3 staff members that we had on hospitality mostly spent the entire day running back and forth, filling coolers with water and ice and dropping them at the houses. And the rest of the hospitality was kind of on volunteers, getting lunches set up and all of that. So yes, this is the number of people we had on hand, but there was a lot more people involved than just that.
Right. And I think you did all of this from a planning standpoint in 6 months, from, obviously January, and then you started building at the end of June, is right, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so the idea was officially put in motion 6 months before, but the bulk of the planning actually started after I moved into our office. So that was actually 8 weeks before. If you know anything about Blitz builds, being a Habitat affiliate or anything, usually the planning for those starts 18 months in advance. But we made it happen, and it was phenomenal. Because we had just had this disaster too, there was a lot of people who were calling who were just like, where do you need me? What can I do? So that made this a lot easier. There was a lot of companies who were saying, do you need hard hats? We'll donate them. Do you need this? We'll donate it. So that helped tremendously. But yeah, the planning was tight. Yes.
Yeah. And again, when we looked at the stats, I think it was amazing to see, right? So you actually increased your volunteering activity by 30x, right? So from a percentage standpoint, that's not 300%, right, necessarily, but 3,000%, which is truly phenomenal. And then so, and I think, there's obviously, like you said, lots of things that need to be done when it comes to a Build Blitz, right? From the fundraising components, right, to the sponsorships, to, to obviously the construction and the plans for the homes themselves. But today, what I really want to do is, for us to dive into the volunteer management side of it, right? And so how did you manage these hundreds of volunteers? And so this is just a little graphic that maybe could be helpful for folks, right? So, when we think about volunteer management, there's this sort of 6-step cycle, right? So you recruit, then you onboard and train, you schedule them, you keep them engaged. And of course, during that's both before, but also during the event itself. And then afterwards, right, ideally, you're able to retain them and you keep them excited about what you're doing. And then like most folks, you have to report on what you actually did. And so we'll sort of walk through some of this together. And by we, I mostly mean Macy. And so maybe, yeah, so to start with volunteer recruitment, can you tell us a little bit, how did you go about doing that, right? And I think you ended up with hundreds of volunteers. And so how are you able to get those hundreds of volunteers?
So a big part of it was just, I can't take full credit for it. A big part of it was, again, just people who were already wanting to help. They were just looking for a way to help in the community. And they called us, and I said, absolutely, I've got something for you to do. A lot of it, a big portion of it was word of mouth. Um, you know, Somebody would find out that we were having this, they would tell their Sunday school or they'd tell their church, and then suddenly the whole church is sending groups out and things like that. We also had, I did some graphics and things. There's one in the corner there. Designed a little logo and made some graphics and did a pretty big social media push on all of it. And then there's a local business called Yellowberry, which is like a multimedia and marketing company, who met with me and basically was like, what can we do to help? Completely for free. They took drones out, excuse me, took drones out and did drone footage and did a really cool video, like a 30-second spot and like a 90-second spot. And WBKO, which is a news station, aired that for free. So we had a lot of help from the community too, and getting the word out that this was happening.
That's great. And then in terms of getting the word out, so afterwards, once you got the word out, you have to think about scheduling and getting people booked for the different dates of the Build Blitz. And so, yeah, can you tell us a little bit of how you went about doing that piece of it?
So at the time, this was obviously my first rodeo when it came to handling this much volunteer activity, like to this capacity. I was not used to trying to get that many people scheduled at once. And the way that I would usually do it before then, because we only had like 13 volunteers a month, and most of those were recurring volunteers, so I didn't have to do this with them. But anytime we'd get a new volunteer, I'd do it very hands-on with them, and have them contact me directly and do it that way. Now, obviously, with this quantity of volunteers, that wasn't really feasible, especially trying to plan this also. So we did QR codes. We did, we also, on all of the social media pushes and stuff, included a link to our volunteer calendar, our volunteer opportunity calendar, and then also put that link on our website, so that anybody who wanted to get involved could literally just click that link and it would take them to, like that picture, a calendar that showed where the opportunities were, and they could select which one they wanted to do, click on it, and then register themselves without ever having to interact with anybody beforehand. So that's basically how we did the bulk of it.
All right. And then, of course, you yeah, you needed to collect some of the liability waivers and contact information. So maybe yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a huge, huge thing, and I'll say this before we started working with Civic Champs, I was tracking our volunteers pen and paper. So no technology, no frills. Everything was pen and paper. All the waivers were a giant binder. All of the emergency contacts were a giant list. So we were actually able to, in the registration process, have them e-sign their liability waivers, their COVID waivers, and also provide their emergency contact so that if I needed to access that, it was as easy as going and typing in the volunteer's name and there's all that information in their volunteer profile. We also wanted to collect some information from the volunteers for this event
Mm,
specifically. Because we had so many people traveling here, so many people with corporations and things, we really wanted to kind of get an idea on that at the end of it all to get kind of a just a broad like understanding of how many of these people were local, how many of these
mm,
people came with their job and all of that. So we were able to actually put that in questionnaire form. Are you here with the group? If so, what's the group name and all of that. We got their addresses again so we could kind of map where everybody was coming from. We were able to get their t-shirt sizes, which was huge because otherwise, it would have been asking them at check-in and digging through boxes to find a T-shirt for them. So we were able to have an idea of how many we were going to have,
mm.
and all of that was able to be done without me having to speak to them at all. Like they were able to do that electronically, and then I was able to pull that up almost and make like a list, which made that just so much easier.
Yeah. And obviously, this information, I think this has been updated a little bit since the Build Blitz, right? And so, but just so folks have a sense of what the profile might look like, this is where you might see a volunteer on Civic Champs, and here's their emergency contact information. Here on the bottom here, you could see what waivers they've signed or anything that they've might still need signing. Any sort of on the here, any reflections they might have, questionnaires, like Macy said, in terms of the answers that they had for, a questionnaire that you might have asked them. So, and again, we'll share a recording of this webinar and also some of the slides after for folks that attended. So no need to take screenshots or anything like that.
Also, before you click away from the volunteer profile here, I'll also add we had partner families who were doing their sweat equity hours on the
Mm,
site that week. And then we also had some of the employees who came with corporations, they were being reimbursed or paid by their companies to be there for a certain amount of hours. So to be able to pull up these volunteers and see right there in the top how many hours they've done and how many times they were there and things like that to provide for either their sweat equity documentation or to their employers was also a massive help. Because other like beforehand, I would have had to thumb through and do the math myself. But being able to isolate it down to one individual and see and provide the proof and everything that they were there was also a massive help.
awesome. No, I'm super glad to hear that. I mean, that is our mission to be helpful. So it's always great to actually hear that it was. And so from a scheduling standpoint, right, you've already touched on how everyone could use our calendar schedule. You could break things into a household or a house. Anything else you'd want to add in terms of scheduling here?
So as far as scheduling it, as far as the way I did it goes, I'll even say that now where I'm at with my comfortability with Civic Champs and having managed that many volunteers now, I probably would have done it a little bit differently. So the way that I did it, and it wasn't that the software couldn't handle it, it was just that I wasn't well versed enough. So the way that I did it then was I just set a maximum number of volunteers per day, which you can see down there at the bottom. It was 214 that day. And 195 people were registered. And then I just set the shifts from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and they could come and go kind of as they please. Now, when I have groups like this, I usually set an 8 a.m. to noon and a noon to 4 p.m. and then an
Mm,
all day one, so that I have a better idea of how many people I'm going to have on site at any given time. So that's something I would have done differently. And like I said, that wasn't Civic Champs' fault. That was my ignorance on the software. But um, so the way that we did it was kind of loosey goosey. It was just kind of like you can come and go as you please, just check in and check out. But if I were to plan this again, I would have done it that way.
no, that's great. And noted for us in terms of making sure that we educate a little better as well. So and then so when people after things got set up on the calendar, obviously, we have a mobile app at with Civic Champs, and so folks can not only register online with the Bowling Green website, but you can also register to become a volunteer for different shifts directly on mobile as well. And so, I think that's something that's a little bit unique to us. And then, sort of going forward in terms of the day of and getting ready to actually build, I think one of the things that people always think about is, how do I communicate with my volunteers, especially for such a big event, right? And so, maybe Macy, you can talk to us a little bit about how you were able to do that during the events.
Absolutely. So picture this, if you will, in your mind. Morning of, we're kicking off the event, first morning, Monday morning. I had 195 people coming, and it's thunderstorming. And we don't have anywhere on our build site to put people during a thunderstorm. So I needed somehow, within this, it hit like an hour before everybody's supposed to be there, get in contact with 195 people to tell them we're delaying an hour and a half. Don't show up. And in the software, I was able to go in and send out a mass text message or email to everyone who was registered and say, we're starting late because of a weather delay. And we had maybe 2 or 3 people of 195 show up, which was just, I can't even stress how convenient it is to be able, especially in a situation where you have so many volunteers from so many different places, to be able to send out the same message to all of them at once was a massive, massive help. And then I think there was another point during the week where it was going to be good conditions all day, but there
Mm,
was a point in the afternoon around lunchtime where the heat was going to spike pretty high. And so we were actually going to stop work for longer than just a lunch break. And we wanted people to still come if they wanted to. And at that point, we had tents and everything set up and hydration and big giant fans. So they would be safe out there. But we wanted people to be prepared for that if they were coming, and to consider that when they were deciding that morning if they were coming or not. And we were
mm,
able to do the same thing. So that was awesome.
that's great. Um, and then of course, checking in is one of our specialties, right? With Civic Champs, so this is the mobile check-in that you're seeing here on the left. But we have mobile, we have a kiosk that we can use. Admins can use their own phones to check in volunteers. I think for the build event, Build Blitz, Macy, you mostly used the kiosk and some mobile. And maybe tell us a little bit of why you chose those two options and how that worked out for you.
So kiosk mode we chose to use mostly because it's what we use on a day-to-day basis on the job site, but also because that way, because up until this point, if they've registered online and stuff, they have not communicated with us
Mm,
as individuals, as human beings, and I wanted to have that initial introduction as well. So I wanted it to be in person, and I will say, there was 2 of us predominantly, sometimes 3 of us running the volunteer check-in, myself and then Susan, who works in our office as an administrator as well. And she had zero knowledge or prior experience with Civic Champs, with the exception of a very quick crash course morning of with me on how this works. And we had zero registration or check-in hiccups the entire week. So I think that speaks volumes to the ease of use. So another reason why we used kiosk mode is because you do have the option to register someone from kiosk mode pretty simply. If they do just happen to walk up on the job site, they just heard that it was happening and wanted to come. So that was part of it too. But we also did have like some sandwich board signs out in front of the tent with a QR code to download the app, because a lot of the volunteers after their first day, they already knew how to do this, how to go about it. So a lot of them downloaded the app. They wouldn't even stop at the tent. They'd wave when they walked in or stop and get their hard hat, and they'd check in on their phone. But also the reason why we wanted to use kiosk mode and the mobile is because, like I said, first day, sure, our tent was pretty packed that morning, and we needed to be right there. But after that, the volunteers just kind of knew how to check themselves in and check themselves out. So it wasn't necessarily something that we needed to be as hands-on with. And then also we had the opportunity, which I think they can do on the mobile app too when checking out, to get comments from them, reflections on their experience, and kind of a little bit of an idea of throughout the week I could go in and kind of look and see, did anybody have any constructive criticisms moving forward this week or anything like that. So that was super helpful too.
Yeah. Excellent. And then I think these are just a couple images from the event itself. I don't know exactly which day, if you can tell me, but it looks like, the first floor, the boards are all up and starting to work on that second floor there here in this picture. And this looks like it's putting together the outside walls, perhaps.
Yeah, so actually in that middle picture, I think that was day 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're putting the trusses up, but actually that little boy in the middle there and the gentleman with the walker, they're watching the trusses go onto their house. That's Jalal is the dad and Oris is the son. They actually completely lost everything to the tornado. The father was severely injured and is permanently disabled because of it. And actually his oldest son, Ahmed, who's 23, was the home buyer. And he was moving his whole family in because he had stepped into the role as provider because both of his parents were injured. But Oris was a super fun kid. He had a great time out there watching. They were actually next door neighbors to the family of 7 that was killed in the tornado. So they had quite a bit of trauma, and still do, obviously, from all of that. So to be able to have them out there and watch the trusses go up and see all these people out there working to build them a safe place to live was a very, very moving moment. So I like to give people background on that picture because if you don't know, it doesn't really have as much impact as if you do know what's going on there.
That's amazing. And then I think these were a couple other ones. Oh, that's a neat one. That must be a drone shot, or both of these must be drone shots.
So those were drone shots from Yellowberry. They're actually grabs from drone videos that they did, but they took so much drone footage throughout the week that really shows how quickly it all happened. And it was amazing. That picture in the bottom corner of the flag and everything, I actually took that the evening before the Blitz build started. I was out there getting everything set up. So that's what it looked like at the beginning of the week. And then by the end of the week, we had dried in houses. So that was pretty cool.
No, that's that is amazing. And then of course, right, so you have this big event, and so after it's completed, or perhaps the main the Blitz part is sort of completed, it's equally important to keep people engaged, right, sort of capture the momentum going forward. And so let's we'll dive into some of this, and yeah, maybe Macy, tell us a little bit about, how you were able to do that, and what that looks like today.
Yeah, so before the Blitz build, I think we touched on it earlier. We had a group of core volunteers that was about 8 individuals. Since the Blitz build, I'd say that's closer to 20 individuals, and all of them started like their first time volunteering with us was during the Blitz build. And they caught the habitat bug, habitatitis, and decided to stick with us. We've had a lot of companies and corporations who have stayed involved, but I've also in trying to keep them involved. Like for example, when we started to round the corner with these homes that they helped start, when we were getting to the finishing stages, I actually sent out another email text thing from the website and said, hey, like the houses that you helped start are
Mm.
almost finished, and if you want to be there to help wrap it up, we'd love to have you. Just because the Blitz is over doesn't mean that we can't use your help. And that had a huge impact.
Hmm.
We had a lot of people who were like, absolutely, I'd love to be there to help see this through. So that was a big thing too, in keeping them engaged. And then also I think just kind of updating on social media and things like that with the progress so far.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then, yeah, in terms of stats, right? So we showed some of the stats from before in terms of active volunteers per month of 13, active, sort of volunteer hours per month of 315. And so what we did is we, instead of looking at the Build Blitz itself, or even the month of the Blitz, we actually took a look at the month after the Blitz, right? So really looking at the retention, because obviously you're going to see a quite the spike, but even after a month or the 6 months after the Blitz, what you see is the average volunteering numbers are still significantly higher at 96 active volunteers per month. Instead of 315 hours, you're looking at 1,400 hours, and then 253 sort of shifts being completed. And if you're looking at this from a graphical form, right, this is sort of what that looks like in terms of the number of active volunteers each month after. And so, before, hopefully you don't have to squint too much, right? But since the graph is so, has such a height difference, but you can see, this line versus this line has quite the difference in terms of the number of folks that are involved even on an ongoing basis. So anything, to add to that, Macy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a large portion of our continued increase in volunteer activity has a lot to do with the Blitz build. A lot of our volunteers, like I said, they were involved in some way in the Blitz and have come back, or they were not directly involved, but they knew someone who came to the Blitz build, and now they want to be involved. So I think that definitely, like, it's hard to judge because, like you said at the beginning, we were also coming out of a pandemic and had put volunteers at a stop for a long time. So we were just trying to get back in the swing of having volunteers, but also everybody was still not going to just be around people if they
Right.
didn't have to be. So we were really having a hard time enticing people to come out and help. So that's definitely part of it. But I'll just admit that it wasn't a huge part of it. Our volunteer outreach wasn't great beforehand. Now, obviously, the media attention and all of that from the disaster definitely spiked attention and had our name in a lot of people's ear who we weren't necessarily on their radar before. But I also think that a big part of it was community education on what Habitat does. A lot of people don't really know what Habitat does, and it's really hard to explain in a few words what Habitat does. But I think once we were able to kind of get our name out in the community, have people understand what it is that Habitat does, have people who were out who had experience with us as volunteers telling their friends and things like that, what kind of experience they had, we definitely still continue to see a consistent uptick in volunteer activity.
No, that's yeah, like they say, and oftentimes it's much harder to recruit new folks than it is to retain, right? And they're if you can have enough retention, it alleviates your recruiting efforts by quite a bit. And so yeah, so here you can see just our back end dashboard from a reporting standpoint. I just wanted to quickly show folks potentially, how potentially easy it is to take a look at the data from an event like this, right? And so I'm going to actually stop sharing here for a moment and log in onto Civic Champs. Yeah, and while we're waiting for this. If folks just have any questions, feel free to, put them in chat. We're going to get into Q&A here very quickly. And so, yeah, if you have questions, we can, we'll get those addressed here shortly. Right. And so let me reshare my screen with you all. And you can see what I am looking at, right? So here, give me 1 second. Okay, all right. Share screen 2. All right, hopefully you all can see that. And so this is Bowling Green's dashboard here real quick. And so first I'm going to change the date range. We're going to go back to July of 2022 when the Build Blitz was happening. And so you can do that here on this filter on the right. And then in terms of filtering, right, so we have this filter button. You can actually filter by the role. In this case, we'll say Build Blitz volunteer. And we apply that. And that's it. So you could see, every sort of Build Blitz volunteers volunteering over the Build Blitz timeframe. You can see how many hours they put in here, just a tremendous amount of work here. We covered 858 shifts. Average duration was 7 hours, so most people stayed for the full day, it looks like. And then there's 6,000 hours of volunteering that happens, within this 1 month. So just really tremendous in terms of the amount of volunteering that we saw, right? So anyway, I thought it might be more interesting to see that live than just a sort of a screenshot here. And I think we only got a few more slides here, but basically I would say in terms of wrapping up, maybe Macy, you can share with us just a couple of your learning takeaways, if you will.
Absolutely. So actually, I gave this a lot of thought because if anybody who's attending is planning a blitz build, it's difficult. And I could have filled this whole page with advice, but there were some main takeaways that I had. One of them was plan for what you have available to you. So the staffing that you have, the capacity that you have, plan within that range. Anything that comes along outside of that is an added bonus, but not to hinge things on having people who you haven't gotten involved yet. Communication is an absolute must. Every single house of the 10 homes had a walkie-talkie, first aid had a walkie-talkie, and then every staff member that was there had a walkie-talkie so that we were able to communicate with each other the entire time being spread out over this giant construction site. And then also the being able to reach out to the volunteers all at once in seconds when not on site was also, like I said, just pivotal.
Hmm.
Meeting as a team regularly, there's no way we could have pulled it off if we didn't do that. We met as the team that was planning this at least once a week. We had a giant blackboard, and we would talk about what everybody did that week, had done, what we needed to work on that week, what questions we needed to answer, what we needed to be mindful of moving forward, and then we would assign those tasks to each other. But also we would meet as the little like subgenres too. So volunteer coordinating would meet and say, like, are we on the same page? Is everything going smoothly? Do you feel good? So on and so forth. So I genuinely don't think it would have come together as smoothly if we didn't do that. And then probably the most important thing that I realized that week is that as a volunteer coordinator, or as the people who are the first face they see walking on a site, you set the tone for them on what the energy and what the experience is going to be like out there. So even when you're absolutely about ready to stroke out from stress, to remain optimistic and positive, because if they walk up and you're being negative and acting like everything's a frenzy, it's going to feel that way to them. And ultimately, I think it's important to remind yourself too that these people are volunteers. They're here to help however they can. So if you do hit a hiccup or something, they're very understanding and graceful in those situations. So not to stress yourself out too much, and to try to remain positive and really kind of remind yourself multiple times a day in a situation like that what the mission is and why you're there, why you're doing this to begin with. So those are my main things that I would tell anybody that's planning a blitz on themselves.
No, true words of wisdom. And I think even not being with Habitat, I think that that still resonates with me quite a bit, right? So that makes a ton of sense. And so as we're wrapping up, right, here is Macy and I's contact info. I assume, Macy, if someone is looking to do a Build Blitz or any other thing, that they're okay to reach out to you. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got all kinds of things I can share with you for planning the blitz. I actually have a whole binder of things I can share with you if you want it. So yeah, absolutely feel free to email me.
Okay. Yeah. And of course, if folks have questions about Civic Champs, this is all of my contact info. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, email me, things like that. And then, as I promised, right, we do have a special offer for today. And so for anyone that's attending, if you are interested in Civic Champs, there's a sort of special link here. If you book a demo with us, it does provide a 25% discount for any sort of subscription that you might sign up for, which is a pretty terrific deal, right? I think we're relatively inexpensive as it is, but this will make it even better for folks. And then last but not least, we are starting a series of webinars. And so these are the next 3 that are coming up. And so the next one is going to be on the 15th. It's going to be talking about how to develop a strategic vision for your volunteer program. We're inviting one of our nonprofit partner friends called Liquid Donate to talk about how they can help you get in-kind donations from customer returns. So someone buys something on Amazon, they decide they don't want it, they ship it out. And instead of sending it to the warehouse, it actually comes directly to your nonprofit as a donation, which is pretty neat. So come on the 22nd to learn about that. On the 29th, we're going to talk about how you can use volunteer metrics for grants. So Instrumental is a fantastic tool to find grants for nonprofits. And so we're going to be partnering with them to talk about how you can use volunteering metrics to help get more grants. And so with that, we'll open it up for any sort of Q&A. If folks have any questions, feel free to raise your hand if you want to come on and ask the question live, or feel free to put it in chat. And if there's, yeah. any and if there's no questions, then that's also totally fine. So, but yeah, we appreciate everyone's time today. This is always, one of the, my favorite parts of the week, just getting to, hear this presentation from Macy, and then sharing this with everyone that's on here. So, yeah, well, thanks everyone. Yeah, we'll hopefully see you in a couple weeks for our next webinar, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, everybody.